Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Transform 2020. We are excited that fellow educators have been able to make it to join our maiden virtual conference, all in our bid to help transform learning in Ghanaian schools. Thank you very much once again for making it to Transform 2020. And for those of you that have connected with us via Facebook and other social platforms, a very good evening to all of you. Tonight, our 2-hour program will be in this format. So we will have two 15-minute presentations, after which we would have a breakout session where we will have some question and answers, and then we'll come back to do another two 50-minute presentations each, and then we'll run it up with a question and answers with our speakers. And then we'll have a last presentation also for 15 minutes before we leave here. It is going to be a very insightful evening. Let's prepare ourselves to learn, to connect with each other, and to help prepare ourselves, even as we hopefully receive our students back in school in January. Thank you very much. Our first presentation will be on an education worth having before, during, and beyond a pandemic. An education worth having before, during, and beyond a pandemic. And our speaker for the night, the first speaker will be Mr. Richard Sapon. He is the Chief Education Officer for TRANSFORM2020. And tonight, he's going to help us find all that we need to know about learning and to get a practical insight on how to create an educational experience that supports successful learning for every child, anywhere, at any time. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for joining Transform 2020. Now I present to you Richard Sapon, the CEO for TRANSFORM2020.
Hello, everyone, and good evening to you all. We're very happy and humble by the experience that you are with us for our first and maiden edition of virtual learning for educators and school leaders. Today I'll speak to you briefly on the theme, an education worth having before and during a pandemic. We will be discussing what a worthwhile education really is and how we can enable it. And for the purpose of today's presentation, I will define education as the process of learning from school or from a classroom. So basically classroom learning. And that is a very simplistic definition that I want to use to share the very thoughts that I have with you this hour. In 2018, the World Bank Human Development Reports review one of the biggest socioeconomic problems that the world faces today, and that was schooling without learning. They realized that there were so many kids, millions of kids in school who were actually not learning. So the report actually distinguishes between schooling and learning, that you can have education, but you might not really experience meaningful learning. And they refer that to as a global learning crisis. But what will interest you to note is that there are about decade-plus research on what worthwhile learning really is about and how, as educators, we can enable learning for every child in our classes. But we believe in EduTransform that there is a need for educators to have access to high quality professional learning to enable them understand how these research findings can be turned into classroom practices so that they can create worthwhile, meaningful classroom learning for every child anywhere. So let me walk you through 3 broad areas about learning and how we can make learning more meaningful and worthwhile for the children that are entrusted into our care. The first thing that we know about learning is that we know why learning doesn't happen. The research is clear on why learning doesn't happen, why there's a lost opportunity of learning, even though we have kids in our schools and classrooms. The second thing that I want to talk about is from the research is that it is clear what teachers and educators can do to really enable students to be successful in their learning. The key drivers or factors that actually enable students to achieve and perform better in school. And lastly, the experiences that educators can create, or the conditions and environments that they can create to ensure that students always experience meaningful learning in their classroom. So these are the broad categories that I'm looking at as I share briefly with you on what worthwhile learning really is about and how we can enable it in our classrooms. So first, let's look at the zones of learning lost. Zones of learning lost. The research points to the fact that the reason why kids are schooling and learning is not happening has to do with the very things that teachers do, and also how we manage the academics in schools. And there are 4 key areas that I want to point to as far as this research is concerned: transitions, assessment, knowledge application, and then classroom work. These are 4 critical areas that explains why learning does not happen. Transitions. You know, in the life of a child through school, they will move from the early years centers, preschool, to the primary school, to secondary, through to the colleges and university. These transitions times are one of the main zones of lost learning opportunity. And there are 2 dimensions to that. The social aspects of it is that when students move from primary school, especially to secondary school, is a new learning environment, there is new challenges, and students find it difficult to cope with that new experience. And oftentimes, some pastoral support and care really enables them to sail through those pressures and the challenges of secondary education when somebody has really transitioned from primary to secondary. But the other aspects of the transitional issue has to do with the system management that goes with it. Do schools have systems in place to ensure that teachers that are receiving students from one stage of their learning to the other have a good idea of their prior attainment, and that they have an idea about their known gaps, and they have planned instruction in such a way that it addresses those gaps and enables students to transition smoothly to a different or higher level of learning. Oftentimes this is lacking, and the research points to that especially transitions from primary to secondary schools, there's a lot of lost learning. Students just realize that there's a dip in their performance. And normally, those of us that are heads, you will realize that parents will come and complain that my child used to do well in primary school, but all of a sudden, he seems to be failing his subjects and not obtaining higher grades in the secondary school. So those transitional systems that we need to put in place and making sure that students are able to transition from primary to secondary, from preschool years to the primary school, even as they leave the secondary school to the university. These are key moments, and we have one big transition ahead of us. The students have been at home for nearly an academic year, and they will be coming back. And we need to have system in place to ensure that that transition back to school is properly managed for our learners and enable every child to progress smoothly into the new school environment. Another area where there's lost learning is assessment, where teachers just assess students to obtain grades. Okay, there's a place for assessing for grading, but that does not really enable or promote learning. Assessment should be used in such a way that students are able to know their current level of performance, have a clear idea of where they are supposed to be in their learning and what they need to do in order to move on from one level to the grade level expectation. So when we assess to obtain grades and to fill grade books, that really in itself does not breathe or prioritize learning. Another aspect where there's a lost learning opportunity from the research is the fact that when we teach knowledge without creating opportunity for students to use or apply that knowledge in novel and familiar and unfamiliar situations, we actually not enabling learning for our students. And that is one key reason why learning does not happen for a number of kids. And the last one, we have to do with classwork, homework. All of it relates to assessment, where students are inundated with so much schoolwork, and all that they do is just basically work, not learning, right? And they could go through that ritual of trying to complete the works for you, but really they are not developing the habits and the right attitudes, dispositions for learning, and not be making the progress that they need to make in their respective classes. So these are very areas where teachers work very hard and spend a lot of energy, but from the research, it points to the fact that it does not really enable learning. Yes, it helps the teacher to complete a syllabus, all right, but it does not really enable learning. And that is why students need to have access to very competent, expert instruction that enables learning. And the school system has to have managerial systems or leadership system that is focusing on learning and ensuring that students' learning gaps are identified and that the right measures are put in place to enable them. Right. So the second thing that I want to look at is the things that we can do to enable increase or enhance students' achievement or attainment in our classes. And they all point to the first point that I'm going to talk about, that we need to put students' mind at work. If we don't create classrooms or schools that develop students as thinkers and doers, then we will not be helping a number of the kids progress successfully in their learning. We will not see an improvement in students' performance and success, right? So when cognition and metacognitive activities are the everyday experience for children, then it helps them to be challenged. It helps them to deal with real world and authentic problems by applying the knowledge that they've acquired and deepen the understandings of things, of concepts that are being taught, so that they can really develop mastery over these concepts that they have been exposed to. So if you're not creating a classroom environment or a learning experience where students are made to think and really think hard and learn to think well, and also reflect on their learning, which is metacognition. And if this is not a flow, like a continuous demand in your classroom, you won't be driving students' achievement. And we need to give students challenging tasks. And we need to give them more time to spend on challenging tasks. And the more time they spend on challenging tasks, tasks that demands thoughtfulness, the better they will be in their learning and the better they will progress successfully in their respective subject. One fourth area that is very key for enabling students' attainment or increasing their performance is the link between home and school. If we create a challenging learning environment and we prioritize learning in our learning space, then it's important as educators, as schools, we need to have clear, established relationships between the school and the home so that the same values are replicated at home. And that also is one key factor that enables students to excel in their learning. One area of research that I want to point to before I come up with my conclusions and inferences about what is the best successful ways of enabling worthwhile learning for students and which path will not be a successful path, is the learning experiences that we create in the classroom, the kind of environment or the conditions under which students really learn in our respective classes. And there are 4 things that the research points to. That you cannot really enable learning unless your curriculum delivery or your instruction starts from what the students know. And that is, it should be learning centered. And then secondly, as we've talked about the key drivers of students' enablement, the factors that really enable students' attainment, we need to create a classroom that demands thoughtfulness. Students are engaged in challenging tasks. So the classroom environment or the learning experience should be knowledge-centered. And thirdly, it has to be assessment-driven. And when I say assessment-driven, I'm not referring in any way to teaching to test, where we produce grades. But I'm talking about formative assessment, where students have a deep understanding of where they are in their learning. They have a deep understanding of where they are supposed to be in their learning and what exactly that they have to do to move their learning forward. So in that classroom, teachers are even using summative assessment or grades in a formative way to adjust the instruction in order to inform and enable learning for their students. And it has to be community-centered, okay? The real starting points of your curriculum delivery and your instruction should start from, as I said, what the students know, but it should also start from the experiences of the students from the community. We need to situate learning in the everyday life of the students. As a geography teacher, you cannot perfectly instruct students to appreciate the different geographical vegetation types and climates within this country, Ghana, without fully connecting it to the everyday life experiences of children. For instance, why is it that the chiefs in the northern part of Ghana sit on skin, whilst those in the southern part of Ghana sit on stool? It has to do greatly with the kind of vegetation, with the kind of climatic conditions that they have. So if you are teaching these topics, climate, weather, in Ghana, in geography, it is important that you start from the community, the everyday experiences of the child, and make that connection and that linkages for the child. And when the child sees that bigger picture and can make a lot of connections, that is where learning is really enabled. So I put it to you that the passion that we have as educators to always complete syllabus is always driven by a very narrow view of learning. That learning is as being taught, that instruction or teaching is learning. Now, as far as I've taught the topic, I've instructed students in this particular subject, then learning has happened. I think that that is the old path to worthwhile learning, which is a very unsuccessful path to worthwhile learning. It does not enable learning. And it is not the kind of education that you want your learners or your students to really have, where we are just driven by that idea to cover the curriculum because we think that learning is all instruction. Learning is instruction, but learning is also construction, and it is also co-construction. It is meaning making as well. And that means that if we can enable worthwhile learning for every child anywhere in our classrooms. I see these four things that should be in every class and in every school. We need to systematically build students' capacity to learn how to learn. It is never how well you taught. It is always how well the students learn. That should be the passion. That should be the preoccupation of the educator, that we concern about how the children learn, know how well we taught. So we have to be very strategic in developing students' learning capabilities and raising them as lifelong learners. And for the leadership part, schooling is not about all the very things that we do. It's about one thing which you and I know, learning. If we check into a hospital, we want to be treated and be healed of any ailments that we have. And the same way as a parent, if I send my child to school, I expect that that child should learn how to learn and be able to learn anything in order to become more aware of the environment so that he can contribute meaningfully to it. So leadership in schools should be learner-centered, right? It should be learning focused. And if leadership in schools is learning focused, then we will be on a path to successful learning. The third thing that I recommend for which is a successful path to worthwhile learning is that instruction and curriculum delivery in schools should deepen students' conceptual understanding, not just give them information. In a knowledge economy, knowledge abounds. Students need to have a deeper understanding of the things that are being exposed to and the things that they are being taught. And lastly, we need to demand thoughtfulness on our students. We need to create a classroom where students really learn to think in a responsive way. And a responsive classroom means that instructions is differentiated, is individualized, and is personalized. In that classroom, students are made to think and learn to think. So raising kids or our students or young people as thinkers, as doers, and as learners, lifelong learners, and having instruction that enables deep understanding of concepts and a leadership that is focused on learning, I believe that is a successful path to an education that is worth having for any child, anywhere, at any time, either in a pandemic, either before a pandemic, or either beyond a pandemic. Thank you very much for connecting with me as I share these thoughts with you on an education worth having. Thank you very much. Okay, so you'll be hearing also from Ms. Akosia Owusu. She'll be speaking on the first 30 days of learning in a pandemic. On how we can create a school experience that focuses on learning, even as we prepare, hopefully, for our students to return to school, hopefully based on the president's promise in this country in January. So let's welcome Akosia Kunedu Owusu, even as she shares her thoughts with us.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, very good. Good evening, everyone. My name is Akosia Kunedu Owusu, and today I'll be sharing with you the first 30 days of learning in a pandemic. As you all know, schools have been shut down since March, and you've heard what has been happening. Some students have had the chance to be in virtual school, others have not been so lucky. So for me, I have categorized what we should do when schools reopen into 3 groups. And I have the mind, the body, and the soul. And Mr. Sapon has touched on all these areas, and I will follow up. So let's think about it. The students or our learners will be coming back, and there are some key areas to consider. Objectives have been lost. If they had been in school in March up till now, we would have achieved some objectives. Objectives have been lost. Skills have been diminished. If they were in school, they would be practicing several skills in numeracy, in literacy, in whatever subjects that they are doing. Skills have diminished. Social skills have been forgotten. When students come back, it will be an interesting time because there are certain things we'll need to go over with them socially. Understanding has been eroded. So these are key areas we all have to think about as the students return to school physically. Now, going forward, I would like all of you to know that if Rome wasn't built in a day, neither are we going to recover from this in a day. It has been a very interesting year. I've never in my life heard of schools being shut down for more than 2 months. But here we are in 2020 with COVID-19 and learners staying at home, teachers at home. It's not going to take a day or a week. And to have an education that is worth having, we need to build it one step at a time. So it's not going to take a day. So what are we going to do? We have so many questions. How are we going to measure loss of learning? Is there any device we can use? What objectives are we going to target? You heard Mr. Sapon. We have knowledge-based targets. We have skills-based targets. We have understanding. Which ones are we going to focus on? What are we going to do with students who have been in school for some time, those who have been online, and those who haven't been in school at all? How are we going to balance all these? How are we going to track their progress? So we really need to ask ourselves a lot of questions. As for the answers, nobody has them. Nobody has ever experienced this. But from our experiences, we need to come up with solutions to all these problems. So like I said, have focused on 3 key areas: the body, the mind, and the soul. The body, the mind, and the soul. There are several questions, but for meaningful learning to take place, as you heard from Mr. Sapon, we need to start with the mind. We are going to start with the mind because that's where the learning will take place. So when it comes to the mind, we need to look at what is in the mind following the absence of face-to-face learning. And I asked the question, how are we going to measure the loss of learning? And I asked, do we have a device that we are going to use? There isn't a physical device, but there's a tool we can use. And we have to use pre-assessments. These are very key. Simple tests that measure the amount of learning that the children have. And the learning should be well structured. It should measure the knowledge, skills, and understanding that they have. The pre-assessments are simple tests that you give to them. It shouldn't be knowledge-based only, like we've all heard. There should be opportunities for them to use that knowledge. The test should test the skills they have, and it should test the bigger picture, what they have in mind. So we need to use pre-assessment. By the time the children have settled in, we must all have our pre-assessment tests ready. We need to test what has happened, what dip has occurred, what learning is still in place. And based on the results, we need to analyze the results critically. Which questions were answered well? Because that will give you an idea of the areas you can relax on and the areas you need to focus on. Which ones were poorly answered? What gaps do you see? There could be skills gap, there could be knowledge-based gap, there can be understanding deficits. So that is what will inform you. And we need to use the results to inform how we achieve the short-term goals going on to the long-term goals. We need to differentiate our lessons. We can't have summative assessments. We can't have lessons that are just for collecting grades. The lessons must focus on differentiating their learning so that you are meeting each student at their point of need, because they are all not the same. Every learner is unique, and the only way you can meet them at their point of need is if you differentiate the lessons based on what you have observed from their pre-assessment. So as educators, we need to have personalized learning targets. This is not very common in our part of the world, but elsewhere, every student has a personalized learning target. And these are targets that are developed based on the gaps you observe. And there are specific objectives you need to achieve for each learner. This will be different from each person's own, and the progress needs to be tracked from then on. Every student, there will be some who will be in similar categories, and there will be some in different categories. But the important thing is that if you pick Kwesi, you can pick his document and see that these are the deficits for Kwesi, these are his strengths, and these are the objectives we need to cover for Kwesi. It's like a report card in reverse. You look at what you can achieve and you work towards that. Educators must not stop learning either. Everything we are talking about, learners and educators, learning must go on. PLCs are very important. Professional learning communities. These must be established and enforced in our schools because we are each other's best resource. You can't take them to school. You can't take your teachers back to the university to relearn. But as a team, they can learn from each other. You can put subject teachers in the same group. So you have numeracy teachers in one group, science teachers in one group. They work together, they study the curriculum, they share ideas and use data. Everything should be driven by data. It shouldn't come from their heads. We think that Ajua needs it. Look at their performance in the pre-assessment and come up with solutions. So it is important that PLCs are established and enforced. Mr. Sapon referred to this. Education is not the learning of facts, but it's rather the training of the mind. And that's what we should all seek to do. I'm not going to look forward to any of my teachers, coming back, writing tons of notes on the board and telling the students, hey, you weren't in school for all this time. You need to learn all this. That's not what we seek to do. We seek to teach them how to learn, learning how to learn, metacognition. And that's what Albert Einstein referred to. So that needs to be done. Now, let's go to the body. Without the body, we are not going to have students. We need our students back. And when they come to us physically, we need to make sure that their learning experiences are worthwhile and that learning is taking place. We need to be aware of the health and safety of our learners. Coronavirus hasn't disappeared. It's still with us. So we have to be mindful and creative about social distancing. We cannot stop eating lunch. We cannot stop having assembly, but there should be systems in place. You heard that in the early presentation. We need to have systems in place. Nothing should be left to chance. The parents are eager to bring their children back, but at the same time, they'll be looking forward to seeing proper systems in place. So social distancing, let's think ahead. When they come to class, how will they sit? What is the explanation for how they are sitting? When they go to lunch, how are we going to do it? Even in assembly, how are we going to do assembly? the resources that we are going to put in place, they must all go towards promoting teaching and learning to augment speedy progress. If you were fortunate to use any of the virtual tools, continue to use them, because they can really support what we are going to do face to face. We don't have a lot of time, and like I said, we are not going to achieve all this in a day or two. It will take time. So whatever resources we can lay hands on to support what we are going to do face to face, let's do that. If you take Google Classroom, you can share tons of videos, worksheets for them to use in class. There will definitely be a budget. Let it focus on teaching and learning. Blended learning. Are all the students going to come back to school on the same day? Probably not. There might have to be a system in place where a group of students come on one day, another group come on another day. So we need to check all that. And let's not take this for granted. Let's promote a healthy lifestyle across the school. Mr. Sapon mentioned it. It should be community-based, because the health of our students at home will affect our health in school. So let's promote a healthy lifestyle across the school. Parents, teachers, everybody must be involved in this. Let's teach ourselves to drink lots of water, eat fruits and vegetables, so that our immune system, plus all the COVID-19 protocols we are going to put in place, will help us continue with our teaching and learning. Oh, my soul. Whoever thought that would be thinking about our soul in a time like this? But this aspect of the human body is also very, very important, and we need to prioritize this. Our learners are coming back to school. As I mentioned earlier, social skills have been eroded, and they are coming back. Their social, emotional well-being should be accounted for. There should be a sense of belonging. They shouldn't come back and feel like school is not such a strange place. We need to think of specific programs that will nurture this. In my school, we have color teams, we have the PLCs, as I mentioned, we have fun activities. And those things, don't take them for granted, because those are the things that build confidence. Those are the things that give the children the opportunity to build social skills. And those are the things that, enrich our soul and promote teaching and learning. One other key area, equity and equality. The learners are going to come back. As I mentioned earlier, some have had the opportunity to be in some form of school. Others have not been in any school. And it will be very, very wrong on our part to judge students who have not been in any school, and they come and we make comments and we tag them. Oh, dear. So, no. We must not make comments like that. Our students must be made to feel welcome. We must promote the team spirit, because that's when learning will take place. Students who are not happy to be in school can't learn. Teachers who are not happy to be in school can't learn. So equity is very important. We need to treat our learners differently depending on their need. So if we identify a group of learners who have not been in school at all based on the COVID-19 school shutdown, why would you put them together with those who have been in a virtual school and then carry on teaching as if they are all the same? That will not be equity. So it is important that we use our data based on the pre-assessment. We use observation of what they have been through and make sure that we are meeting them at their point of need. All learners must make progress. I cannot emphasize this enough. All learners must make progress. If they were all at point A, obviously they will all not move at the same pace. Student A will move to point A1, student B will move to point A, point 2. But the important thing is that all learners must make progress. So don't stop. There'll be challenges, there'll be a myriad of challenges, but we cannot stop. Every learner is an achiever. We must drum that into our heads. Every learner is an achiever. So when we write the pre-assessment, let's not judge them based on the grade. In fact, you are not going to use the grade for anything. You are rather going to use the results based on the questions you have asked, the formative assessment. You are not going to tell the student, you got 80, okay, so you are okay. You got 90, so as for you, don't need any support. No, look at the knowledge, look at the skills, look at the understanding, and take it from there. Carry on with the plan, assess performance, diagnose, adapt the plan based on the results, check their strengths, their challenges, have a plan to close the learning gaps. There must be a plan. Assess their current position. We cannot take for granted what has happened since March. So we need to assess their current position and take it from there. It should be learner-centered. Assess their current position. It means it has to be learner-centered, their position. So it's not about how well the teacher will teach, as Mr. Sapos mentioned, but it is how well the learners learn. So in brief, as we come back to school physically, let's think about the mind, the body, and the soul. And when we do that, it will be an education worth having. Learning will take place, and our students will be critical thinkers, and they will be doers. They will not be vessels that you are going to pour information in. They will be citizens of this globe who actually find solutions to problems because they are all achievers. Thank you very much. Thank you for connecting with me. I look forward to hearing your questions or your suggestions. Thank you all very much.
Hello. All right, good evening. Let's continue with the next session where we look at the brain and how our students learn. I believe for a lot of us, we are also worried about the fact that there are a lot of gaps and our learners will be having challenges as they move into a new uncertainty. However, despite the uncertainties, we need to be mindful of the fact that the way students learn is very essential in the way we go about doing our work. And if we take advantage of how they learn, a lot of the things that are a worry to us now, we'll be able to overcome them. In this session, we're going to take our time and look at the student's brain and then find out how the student's brain works and look at the things that we need to do so that the student's brain can be utilized to help us go on with our practices as we do. But to start with, let's reflect a bit about our students' learning in their brain. Have you wondered why students sometimes remember the things we taught them? Some easily remember the shoe we wore. They remember the joke we cracked. However, some really struggle to remember the content which we taught them the day before. And then they even struggle to get ahead in the learning that we expect from them. Do we know why? Do we know why it is so easy for some of our learners to remember the things we taught them whilst others struggle? Do we also know why some of our learners easily remember what we wore the day before, but can hardly remember the things we taught them the day before? All this has to do with the brain and one most important part of the brain called the neuron. There are millions of these neurons in our brain, and these are the most singular important features in our brain that helps students to learn. We can liken the neuron to our palm. It consists of what we call the cell body that stores all the information within ourselves, the brain, the things that we have learned over time. They are each of them stored in the neuron. The neuron has appendages called dendrites that are at the end of it that helps it to transmit information. It also has axon that is also able to transmit the impulses or the information that is sent across to the next neuron that we have. And so for us as humans and for us as educators, an easy way for us to remember the most important feature in our student's brain is looking at our palm. So the palm becomes our cell body, and then the fingers becomes the dendrites, and then the hand itself becomes the axon. Now for learning to take place, neurons will need to align with similar neurons that are able to transmit information. So one set of information from one neuron, when it finds a nearby neuron that has something similar, information set that is similar, that neuron is able to then transmit the information. And the cell body will have to send impulses across to the other neuron nearby so that they, in the end, can send the information that it needs. If this is not done, learning does not take place. So learning can only take place when our students are able to send impulses or messages from one neuron to another neuron so that the information can be transmitted. But the question is, how come our learners easily remember and others struggle? We need to know that before any learner can remember, there should be the formation of chains of neurons which are all related in terms of the information set that they are all stored. The information which is stored in one neuron will have to find another set of information that is closely related so that they can form that chain. And once the impulses are sent from the cell body, they can then move across from one to the end. And when that happens, then remembering can take place. In the same vein, when our learners are not able to get the opportunity to have a continuous flow of information, then forgetting will set in. And this happens when the information set is not used. This also happens when the sort of information that the students have received is not deemed to be useful. The human brain is made to forget. And so when we have set of information which the brain captures as not so useful, they tend to be thrown away or buried deep into the brain, and such that it becomes very difficult to retrieve and use it for any new learning that is taking place. So as educators, it's very important that we are knowledgeable about what brings out remembering for our learners and what also brings out forgetting for our learners. And we are able to use that to help plan and prepare the practices that we do so that our learners can all benefit from that. So we should note that once the impulse is sent and there is no related neuron close by, that impulse will die down, and then there will not be any connection that will be sent. Any other impulse that will be sent, if it doesn't get any chain to go on with, then the impulse will die down, and then forgetting will take place. Now, what does it mean to us in terms of the things we ought to do in terms of practices? The very first thing that we all need to be very mindful of is that we should look at the multiple pathways with which we give information out. We all know that our learners receive information through voice, through the sense of sight, through the opportunity given to them for them to practice with their hand, through the demonstrations that we give them and all the others. But then for every single lesson we do, we should be mindful of the fact that if the main way by which the students are going to receive information is just one singular path, then definitely the student is not going to have a rich storage of the set of information, and they are going to forget easily the things that they are learning. Now, it is also very important that as educators, we are very mindful of the fact that our learners will need to have the right ways of learning. And that one of the things we should all note is that when students are given the opportunity to read and then use self-generated questions or review questions to revise the things they have read, they are likely to do much better than when the students just read and reread the information. When you read the information and you just go back and then read it again, you are having only one way of trying to store the information. However, the moment the student uses testing together with reading, the student gets the opportunity to store the set of information in ways that they can easily remember and then apply them. And research tells us that when students have just read a passage or just reread the passage, they are not going to do as much better as students who have read the passage, taking some time off to ask themselves the understanding they've gotten for the things they've read, and go back and then reread them and then test themselves on the things that they've read. Again, it's also very important that we adopt the mixed approach in terms of the things we teach our learners. Let's illustrate this with, say, the concept of teaching transformation. Transformation technically would mean that you are taking the student through what happens to shapes as they move. The shape can translate or slide from one end to the other. The shape can reflect. The shape can rotate. The shape can enlarge. The classical approach for most educators is to take each of these concepts and then treat them at a point, and then expect that when the students have mastered one concept, then they move on to the next concept. But when we use this single approach, the students are not able to make very strong connection between the things they have learned. They tend to now struggle to have the opportunity to link the things they have learned. But however, if the students are given the opportunity to see the general picture, the big picture of transformation, and see one particular shape reflected, this same shape goes through enlargement, this same shape goes through reflection, and this same shape goes through translation. The student is now able to compare and see the differences or the changes that happen to the shape whilst it goes through the different forms of movement. So as educators, it's very important that we should not lower the bar by thinking that once the student goes through one step at a time, they are likely to do better. When the students are given much challenge in terms of seeing the big picture of the concept that they are trying to learn, they are now going to do much better because the brain thrives on giving the opportunity to go through things that are much more sophisticated rather than things that are easy to grasp, because the brain cells are likely to put it in a bag where they don't see it as so relevant. It's also very important that as educators, we focus on giving the students the opportunity to take things in bits, to have a longer time span over things rather than spend one block of time over the things we do. Imagine you are teaching a concept that you want the students to cover over 5 hours. If you give the students opportunity to do all that in one 5-hour block, the student is likely to forget because in the end, the work that they've done has not been spaced. However, if you give the students opportunity to take it 1-hour blocks and have breaks in between, so the student will then get opportunity to associate what they've learned in one 1-hour block and then compare it with the other things that they are learning the next hour, and then find the relationship between the two of them, that student is now going to be able to have the opportunity to remember more and be able to do more. And so it's very important that as opposed to giving the students opportunity to cram the things that we expect them to learn, we are better off helping our students if we give them the opportunity to space the things that they are going to learn, give them the opportunity to reflect on each thing they have learned, and then ask themselves questions about it so that they can move on with it and form much solid connection between the things that they are learning. Again, let's not be always fixated in giving our students the chance to only present the things they have learned in tests or in writing. How about moving away from just writing and giving your students opportunity to use symbols, to use non-linguistic representation, to then get the things that they have written? Get your students the chance to use mind maps. Get them the opportunity to move away from just copying the notes to summarizing the notes using graphic organizers. Get that students to take a look at some information in a textbook and make their own notes about it in a summary where they are using graphic organizers to get the things done. Again, it's also very important that you get the students to think through the things they are doing with their own learners, such that they all develop their own mnemonics that will help them to do the things that they ought to do. When our learners are given this opportunity to use non-linguistic representation in learning the things that they have to learn, they are going to form much solid connection between the things they have learned and be able to remember them more, so that in the end, they can continue to excel in the things that they have to do. Again, let's move away from getting our students to do surface learning to what we call deep learning. Deep learning means that the students are going to question themselves about their own learning. They are going to ask themselves, what is it that I've learned at the end of this? What was the set objective I had in mind? Can I apply it? How can I apply this concept? How is this concept that I've learned related to other things that I've learned previously? And how would it be relating to other things that I'm yet to learn? When the students get opportunity to learn and apply the concept and see it in different ways, in novel ways, then the students are developing deep learning. And when students get a chance to do deep learning, they are likely to remember the things that they do and be able to apply them even when they are given new situations. As educators, it's very important that we make sure that our lessons have objectives, they have aims, and the aims drive what the students are doing. It is not just okay if you just tell the students we are learning about fractions, but it's important that the students know exactly the aim with which they are learning. What is it about fractions that they are learning? Are they learning to add fractions? And if they are successful at adding fractions, what would that look like? What criteria are they going to use to judge whether their work or their learning has been successful? When you give your students opportunity to have a success criteria and then an objective to focus on, the students at the end of each learning episode can pause and ask themselves questions about what is it that we set out to do and how have we been able to achieve them? Would this constitute a correct way of doing it? Would this constitute a correct answer? Can we say that now we know all these things? And when the students have the opportunity to use the objective or the aim set to move along in a lesson, that student is now going to do much better. So as educators, we want to recommend that even as you face a new era of uncertainty, it is very important that you give your learners the opportunity to use objectives to drive their own lessons, give them the opportunity to have deep learning as opposed to surface learning, give them the opportunity to have non-linguistic representation of the things that they have learned, give them the opportunity to use mind maps, use mnemonics and the others so that they can easily learn, give them the opportunity to move back into the things that they have learned and then reflect so that in the end they are going to do much better. And let be sure that in their planning, the students' way of thinking, their way of learning is being used. And note that when your students don't have any relevant previous knowledge to hook what they have learned to, they are likely to forget the things that they have learned. And the chances are that whatever you help them to do, they are not going to succeed at this. Thank you very much for your time. We hope that as you move into a new era of teaching and learning, your learners are going to be much they will be benefiting much from whatever you are going to teach them, because in the end, they are going to have the opportunity to take advantage of how they learn in doing the things that they have to do. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing.